Okay, good morning. So, Parshas Shelach, the famous story of the Meraglim. So, I'm going to share with you today. I'll just review the superficial story just very briefly, and then I would like to share with you today two sort of unique insights into the story of the Meraglim. There's so many different explanations into how this story could have happened and what exactly happened. And clearly, this is one of the traumatic, tragic stories of the desert experience that the Jewish people went through. There were several. The rebellion of Korach was one. The multitude of complaints was another. But this story of the spies was had tremendous historical reverberations, as we know. So what happened? So the Jewish people have received the Torah. They're given the commandment to march towards Eretz Yisrael. What? Yeah, yeah. I am. Yeah, yeah. So, and the Jewish people are given the commandment to march towards Eretz Yisrael, and then Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, "Shlach lecha anashim, send out spies um, to spy the land, to see on a simplistic level is to see how they should go about conquering the land." What ends up happening, as we all know, is the spies come back and don't give a report on how to conquer the land. They basically come back with a report that the land is unconquerable, that we cannot achieve this, that this is too much for us. And we all know the story of what happens. The Jewish people get scared. They start crying. Moshe took us out of Mitzrayim for this, and to go to an unconquerable land that will suffer defeat there, and that ends up causing displeasure by Hashem to such an extent that Hashem says that number one, all the Meraglim end up dying, all the spies end up dying. And Rashi tells us how they died. Their tongues became swollen and infected, and ultimately that infection ended up killing all of them. But more than that, that all of the Jewish men who complained uh, about the spies' report ended up dying in the Midbar as well. That entire generation of men ends up dying in the Midbar. And it is 40 years now until the Jewish people are able to come into Eretz Yisrael with a whole new generation. So obviously, there's a ton of questions on this story. The first and most obvious question is how, these are the number one, these are not just spies. As the Torah itself alludes to, we'll examine the psukim in a moment, but these are the Nasi Ha'eda. These are tzaddikim. These are like the greatest spiritual leaders of each one of the Shvatim. So, and we'll see how the Torah alludes to that in a second. We're gonna go through some of the psukim in a moment, but just taking that at face value, how is it possible that these tzaddikim, these Nasiya Eda, these princes of every tribe, how could they come back with such a terrible report about the Holy Land of Israel? This is what they were all excited to go to. This is God's land that God chose for them. Not only that, these people just lived through Yetzias Mitzrayim. They lived through the Har Sinai experience. They lived through Kriyas Yamsuf. If these people understood anything, they understood that nothing is outside the realm of Hashem. They experienced open miracles. They experienced the splitting of the sea, the Nile turning to blood, Makas Becheres. They experienced not just a slave escaping from Mitzrayim, but an entire nation leaving Mitzrayim, which had never happened before. So clearly, Hashem was operating with them above nature. Nature clearly was not a limitation So how is it possible for them to come back and say, oh, this is unachievable? This is unconquerable. The land's filled with giants. It's too fortified. Uh, they're stronger than us. It doesn't make any sense. Just on a superficial level, the story itself makes no sense. How are we meant to understand it? So obviously there's deeper levels to this story. Obviously, it can't simply be understood on its most superficial level. It makes no sense. And there's a plethora of explanations on this story. And the truth is, Shivim Panim LaTorah, as we know, there are 70 levels of understanding Torah. So all of these explanations at one level or another have some emes to them, and we have to sort of make room in our minds for the various explanations and their and ultimately the lessons that we can learn from them, because that's really the bottom line. The Torah is not a history book. It's not just telling us about the history of what happened, because obviously there's entire chunks of history that are missing there. It's not a history book. Every part of Torah is an eternal lesson, not just for that generation, but for every generation. So obviously, if a story, if an episode is included in Torah, there's clearly profound lessons for us in 3,000 years later in that story, in that episode. And as we know from my shiur, those are the lenses to which I like to look at the Torah. What is the lesson? What's the message here, and what's the lesson for us? Okay, so let's dissect. I'm going to open up the screen for those of you who are on Zoom, and let's dissect some of the at least it's the some of the verses dealing with the story of the Meraglim. So take a look at pasuk Beis here. This is the beginning of the parsha. Shlach lecha anashim. Hashem tells Moshe, "V'daber Hashem Moshe lemor." Is the first pasuk. Shlach lecha anashim v'yisuras eretz Canaan. Send for you men, send out men that will spy the land of Canaan. Asher ani noisim l'bnei Yisrael, the land that I am giving to Bnei Yisrael. Ish echad lamata avesav. One person. Each spy should be one person from each shevet. Tishluchu kol nasi bahem, and Hashem actually instructs who they should send. The nasi, the lead. The nasi is the leader of the shevet, the spiritual leader of the tribe. So you have already one clue here in this pasuk that there's more to this story. I mean, there's several clues here, but one that I want to focus on is ish echad, ish echad. Why two times ish echad? The point is ish echad lamata avesav, one person from each shevet. So why repeat twice ish echad, ish echad? Why say that twice? Obviously, again, when we see nothing in Torah is superfluous, nothing in Torah is extra. It could have given us the same meaning by just ish echad lamata avesav. So the fact that it says ish echad is we're, as the reader, we're meant to look at that as the learner of Torah as a clue. There's a clue here that there's more to this story. And the ish echad is one of the remazim of that clue, one of the hints to what this clue is. Okay. The other question is that, as I mentioned, shlach l'cha anashim. Anashim, as Rashi says in Pasuk Gimel, because it also says, Kulam anashim, Reishi b'nei Yisrael hema. The Torah stresses, not only did it stress in Pasuk Beis, called Nasi Bahem, that these are the princes, these are the Nesiim, these are the spiritual leaders of every tribe, but in Pasuk Gimel it says it actually explicitly. V'yishlach Esam Moshe mimidbar paran al pi Hashem. Moshe sends them with God's permission. Kulam anashim. They were all anashim. And Rashi tells us the word anashim alludes to the fact that they were dignitaries. These were not just regular men. These were spiritual dignitaries. These were the leaders of the generation. And the Torah tells us actually clearly this in the very next words. Rashi b'nei Yisrael hema. These were the leaders, these were the heads of the Jewish people, the spiritual heads of the Jewish people. So this is going to be another clue that there's more to this story that we at least appears to be on the superficial level, because imagine we need spies. I mean, look at just what happened now in Iran. The incredible network that the Mossad, the spies of Israel, were able to accomplish in Iran before this whole, milchama broke out. Apparently, this was 20 years in the making. Um, Now, who would you send to be those spies? Who did Israel send? Did they send the Rosh Yeshivas? Did they send the great rabbis of Israel to be those spies? No, they sent trained spies. They sent those men who were trained, who had an understanding in what it is they were accomplishing through this mission. So why on this mission to spy the land of Canaan, why is Moshe Rabbeinu sending spiritual leaders? That's seemingly not the best people to send as spies. The spiritual leaders certainly have their role in leading Klal Yisrael spiritually. But if I'm going to send spies to spy the land, I want to send professionals. I want to send those who at least, again, you're going to say, well, maybe there's not professionals. They're just out of Mitzrayim. There is no training. Okay, but send those people who would be most likely to succeed in that mission, who have the talents, strengths, and abilities to succeed in being a spy. Certainly spiritual leaders have their talents and strengths, but spying is perhaps not one of them. And yet, it's not just one spiritual leader Moshe Rabbeinu sends to ensure that the spies are on track. The entire group of spies are all spiritual leaders. That itself, again, is a clue to us that there's more to this mission than meets the eye. It's not just about spying the land, because if I was just about spying the land, I wouldn't send the 12 great Rosh Yeshivas. Okay, so obviously there's more to this story, and our job is to figure out what that more is, what the underlying message of this story really is, and again, how we can apply it to our own lives. And finally, one last question is that Rashi tells us the juxtaposition of Parshas Shelach, the beginning of Parshas Shelach, to the end of Parshas Beha'aloscha. And Rashi says the end of Parshas Beha'aloscha, we know that Miriam was stricken with Sarath because she spoke negatively about Moshe Rabbeinu separating from his wife. Right? We know Moshe Rabbeinu separated from his wife when he began this relationship speaking with Hashem on a daily basis. Because he was speaking with Hashem on a daily basis, he felt that he did not want to put himself in a state of Tuma, and therefore separated from his wife completely, dedicated himself completely to Hashem. Moshe and Aaron didn't like that. After all, they also speak to Hashem. They also had a certain level of Nevi'as. Why is Moshe Rabbeinu separating from his wife? It's not the proper thing to do, which normally it's not the proper thing to do. But Moshe Rabbeinu was on his own spiritual level, had a unique relationship with Hashem that nobody else had. And Hashem was upset with Miriam for instigating this negative talk about Moshe Rabbeinu. She's stricken with tsaras. The entire nation waits for her to be healed from her tsaras before they can move on from their encampment. And that ends Parshas Beha'aloscha and then Parshas Shelach. And Rashi tells us that the juxtaposition is that all of these spies who saw that Miriam was stricken when she spoke Lashon Hara against Moshe Rabbeinu, they saw how Hashem doesn't like Lashon Hara, and yet they didn't learn the lesson as they come back and speak Lashon Hara about the land. So that's the juxtaposition, the Lashon Hara of Miriam at the end of Parshas Beha'aloscha, juxtaposed with the Lashon Hara of the Meraglim, that one of the reasons why they were afflicted and punished so harshly is that they didn't learn from the lesson of what they just experienced. But that doesn't make any sense, because Miriam spoke Lashon Hara about a human being. The Meraglim spoke Lashon Hara about rocks and trees and stones, about the land. There's no prohibition about speaking Lashon Hara about a land, about inanimate objects. The prohibition is against speaking against a human being, and that they didn't do. So what does Rashi mean? Rashi takes it from a medrash. I mean, what does the medrash mean? How does that even make sense, that whole juxtaposition, that they didn't learn from Miriam? What should they have learned from Miriam? Their sin was a completely different sin. So how do we understand this? So I want to share with you two explanations. they're not necessarily connected or related, but they're both, but perhaps they are, but they both give us a very powerful lesson for us today in the story of the Meraglim and what we're meant to extract for ourselves from Parshas Shelach. Okay, so number one, clearly, if we unravel some of these clues, clearly this was more than just a military mission of trying to figure out the best way to conquer the land. Because as we said, on a military mission, you wouldn't have sent the 12 great spiritual leaders. You wouldn't have sent the Rosh Yeshivas. You would have sent people who were more fit and more apropos for a military mission. So what exactly was the mission of the Meraglim? So the mission of the Meraglim was actually twofold. One of the missions here was to see, is the land capable of being conquered al piteva, or is it going to need miracles that's l'mayla mederech hateva? In other words, is the land able to be conquered according to the means of nature? Is it just going to take a military battle to conquer this land? Or is it going to take more than that? Is it going to take something that transcends nature? Is it going to take a miracle? And then the second fold question is, if it's going to take a miracle, are the Bnei Yisrael on the spiritual madrega that they are worthy of this miracle? Are they on that level? Are they on this spiritual level worthy of a miracle? So, and this is why Moshe Rabbeinu chose tzaddikim, why he chose the Nesiah Eda, and why also you have one from each shevet. Why is that so important? Ish echad, why lamata avesam? Why one from each shevet? Why not just take the 12 most appropriate people, or the 12 greatest spiritual leaders? Because the nasi of each shevet knew his tribe, knew his shevet, knew the people in his shevet, and so therefore the Nesiim had to estimate the Jewish people spiritually, and this is why the need for tzaddikim. Were they worthy of a miracle that is l'mayla mederech hateva? Were they worthy of it at this point? And so the Meraglim come back with a twofold report. Number one is that, and this is what they're saying, there's giants in the land. The land is fortified. It is going to take a miracle, l'mayla mederech hateva. That is what their report is. They're not necessarily speaking Lashon Hara on the land. They're explaining exactly the situation. It is exactly what they were charged to do. This isn't going to take a regular military operation. This is going to necessitate a miracle from Hashem that is completely l'mayla mederech hateva. And this is what then they say their second estimation, and here is where their sin is, that Klal Yisrael is not capable. They are not worthy of this miracle. They're not capable of achieving spiritual elevation to the point, in such a quick time, to the point where they are deserving of a miracle of l'mayla mederech hateva. And that's who they're speaking negatively about. They're not speaking negatively about Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael, they're speaking exactly the truth. There's giants there. The lands are fortified. The land consumes its people. This is, if we're going to achieve this, it's going to be something that's l'mayla mederech hateva. It's going to necessitate a miracle from Hashem, and Klal Yisrael is not worthy of that miracle, and they don't have the capacity to elevate themselves in such a short time to achieve that miracle. This was their estimation. And if you look in the words, let's go back now. If we see it through those lenses, I want to share with you. Again, I'm sharing the screen. We look at the words. Hold on, let's jump to the second aliyah here. And let's look at the words that Kalev says when Kalev answers them. Because now they come back and they say this report. And everybody's crying and everybody's upset because, after all, we're not worthy. We're indeed not worthy. And this is what they say. Somebody has I froze again. Oh, I don't know why I keep freezing. I hope at least my if I'm freezing visually, but I think from last time my voice was able to come through, so you're able to hear me even, and eventually it'll unfreeze. So yeah, but if you come live, I never freeze live. Well, I shouldn't say never, but rarely. Okay, so look at their words. They say, "Efes ki oz ha'am ha'yeshiv ba'aretz on pasuk Chavches." The people are powerful who live in this land. Ba'arim b'tzuris gedolos. The cities are huge and they're fortified. The Gam Yaldi and Nakra Inusham, and we saw children of giants there. V'malak yeshiv eretz hanegev achiti v'yibusi amuri yeshiv bahar, and it's surrounded by all of our enemies. And what is Kalev? And the Jewish people aren't capable. What does Kalev say? The Yas Kalev El Moshe, and Kalev silences everybody. And what does he say? Vayemer. Look at Kalev's words. Aloi naleh. Now the simple translation is, we can go up to the land. But Kalev is saying something else. Aloi naleh. We are capable of spiritual elevation. Aloi naleh, as we can go up. We can be deserving of that miracle. We can achieve a spiritual elevation. And therefore, once we can achieve that, v'yashena isa, we can inherit the land. Oh, I'm going in and out from the screen share. It's the screen share that causes the freezing. Okay. Oh, so thank you, Shani, for pointing that out. So hopefully I'm unfrozen now. So bottom line is, I want to share that screen one more time. So if I freeze again, it's important. I want to share the screen another time. But bottom line is, if you look at Kalev's words, Kalev is answering, Alei naleh. We can achieve spiritual elevation. We can achieve that aliyah. V'yashena, and therefore we can inherit the land. So it wasn't lashon hara on the land that was the spies issue. It was doubting Bnei Yisrael. That was their issue. That was their fatal flaw. It was not valuing Bnei Yisrael properly, and that was what they were meant to learn from Miriam. Miriam, who spoke negatively about one Jew, Moshe Rabbeinu, was afflicted. They're speaking negatively about the entire nation. Halachas kama v'kama. That's what they should have learned from Miriam. Now that Rashi makes sense. The underestimation of Klal Yisrael, which our enemies have done from the beginning of our time, have underestimated us, including Ad Hayom Hazeh. But the Avin Palili, the terrible sin, is when we underestimate ourselves. When we don't believe that we can achieve anything, that Klal Yisrael is a raisa v'kuchabrichu v'Yisrael kulichat, that Hashem and the Jewish people and the Torah are one, that we are connected to Hashem. Hashem is infinite, and therefore we are infinite. Oh, it keeps freezing. I'm sorry. I don't know why it keeps freezing. I don't know why. Our Wi-Fi works in every other way. I don't know why. I'm sorry I keep freezing. I don't know why that's happening. All I can tell you is come live, and I do not freeze live. Come to the shiur live. Come back to the shiur live, and I will not freeze. I don't know why I keep freezing. I'm sorry. So bottom line is, I'll try to work through the freezing. The bottom line is that undervaluing, are not estimating Klal Yisrael, the godless, the greatness of Klal Yisrael, and understanding that this was even the words. My words are freezing. I'm only here. They're only hearing a word here or there. Ugh, I'm sorry. I'm freezing. I don't know why. There's nothing I can do, so I'm just going to keep going, and hopefully you'll get the content of the shiur. So it is the underestimating of Klal Yisrael, the not valuing of Klal Yisrael, that was the sin of the Meraglim. This was the fatal flaw, which is a fascinating insight. There's a Naftali Tzvi of Ropshitz has a sefer, one of the great Hasidic early 1800s Hasidic masters, early Hasidic masters, a sefer called Zera Kodesh, his sefer. And in that sefer, he writes why Hashem chose the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. Why that name? That name is Gematria 26. He says it represents 26 is 2 times Echad. It represents the Echad of Hashem, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the unity, the unique quality, the oneness of Hashem, and the and the other echad is Bnei Yisrael. Mi ka'amcha Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz, as the pasuk says. Who is like the Jewish people? Goy echad ba'aretz, a unique, unified nation. And Hashem calls himself Yud Kei Vav Kei to show the unique qualities of both the echad of Hashem and the echad of Am Yisrael. And to be a spiritual leader of the Jewish people necessitates, to be a Jew at all, ultimately necessitates an understanding of both of these levels of echad. This is what it means to be a Jew, that we understand the unique echad of Hashem and the unique echad of Klal Yisrael. And not understanding the echad of Klal Yisrael, not understanding the greatness of the Jewish people and the unique spiritual qualities that the Jewish people have, and their capacity that no matter what they are facing, no matter even if it necessitates a miracle, l'mayla mederech hateva, that Klal Yisrael has the capacity to as Kalev says, to achieve spiritual heights, to merit a miracle, l'mayla mederech hateva. Not understanding that of Klal Yisrael removes one from the category of being a spiritual leader. And this was the problem with the spies. They were tzaddikim, they were nasiya eda, but they were tzaddikim only in the category of the echad of Hashem. But when it came to understanding the Jewish people and who the Jewish people are and what the Jewish people were capable of, this is where they failed. This is why, if you look back in the pasuk, what does Hashem tell Moshe Rabbeinu? Ish echad, ish echad. It has to be, I want you to choose people who are experts in two echads, both echads, the echad of Hashem and the echad of Am Yisrael. And that's why it says ish echad, ish echad. Hashem is already telling Moshe Rabbeinu, you need to choose leaders who are experts in both levels of echad of Hashem and the goy echad ba'aretz, the echad of Am Yisrael. This was the fatal flaw of the Meraglim, and this is the lesson, such a powerful lesson to take out of this story. We as Jewish people have to understand who we are. This is the lesson of the story of the Meraglim, that nothing is beyond us, that there's nothing that we cannot achieve, that there are no spiritual heights that we cannot climb. It doesn't matter what our past was. It doesn't matter if our past was filled with negativity, if we were sunk into the Mem Teshari Tuma as they were not so long ago, these Jews in the Midbar. And therefore they felt about themselves that we're not capable of on our own achieving this great miracle. My audio's freezing. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna keep going for the people who are here. So this is one level or one explanation of the story of the Meraglim, and the powerful lesson that it teaches us not to underestimate ourselves, never give up on Klal Yisrael as a whole, as a nation, but also individually. Never give up on ourselves, never give up on our children, never give up on a fellow Jew. There is nothing that is unachievable for us. There is nothing that we cannot accomplish. We are one with the Torah and Hashem, and therefore we can achieve great spiritual heights, notwithstanding the negativity of our past. There is nothing that Klal Yisrael cannot achieve. And that's the lesson of the Meraglim. And that's the fatal flaw of the spies. That's one interpretation. I want to share with you another explanation that's somewhat related, completely separate explanation, somewhat related, but not entirely. And that is that we notice that when the Meraglim are mentioned, when the Torah lists them, the Torah lists in each shevet. When the Torah lists the shevet of Ephraim, it just says who the representative of shevet Ephraim was Yeshua. But when it says the representative of Menashe, it also lists Yosef. Lamata Yosef, Lamata Menashe, and then it lists the name of the Nasi of Shevet Menashe. Why is Yosef only mentioned by Menashe and he's not mentioned at all by Ephraim? Again, that's a clue. That's a remez to us. There's a message there. Our job is to figure out what that is. Also, the other thing that we seems to be a clue in this whole story is that the Torah goes into tremendous detail about the grapes that they picked, right? That the Torah goes out of its way to tell us it was the season when the grapes were ripened. And then it goes on to tell us this. They picked this oversized grape that was so massive that two people had to carry it. Why all those details about the grapes? Again, there's something there as well. So if we look back, the clue to this is a teaching from the Maggid of Mizrich, going all the way back to Parshas Shelach. In Parshas Shelach, when the Jewish people come tomorrow, right? They come tomorrow. They're led away from the Yam Suf. V'yavei marasa, says the Torah in Pasuk Chav Gimel and Parshas Shelach. V'yavei marasa, they come tomorrow. V'lo yachu lishtes mayim mimora, and they can't drink the water. Famous story. They can't drink the water. Why? Ki morim heim, because they're bitter. Al kain kara shama mara, and therefore that's why that place was called Mara, which means bitter. And we know the whole story there. That Moshe Hashem commanded them throw sticks in the water, and the sticks in the water made the water sweet, etc. The Maggid Mizrich translates that pasuk differently. Ki marim heim doesn't refer to the water being bitter. It refers to Klal Yisrael. It doesn't say the water was bitter. It says they were bitter. Ki marim heim. So we translate it as though they couldn't drink the water. Ki marim heim, because the water was bitter. But it says the Maggid, Ki marim heim, isn't referring to the water. The Maggid Mizrich says it's referring to Klal Yisrael. And he gives fascinating psychological insights into the mindset of the Jewish people in the Midbar. And he says that they calls them on the entire time that they were in Mitzrayim. They did not truly appreciate the low spiritual level they were on, just because they were so surrounded and so immersed, and this was the environment they were in. The Erev Haaretz of Mitzrayim, and on top of that, the shibud and the persecution and the pain and the suffering they went through, they didn't truly appreciate how low they had sunk to. It was only after they left Mitzrayim and after they experienced Har Sinai, it was only then that, and after they go through the Siras HaOmer and this sort of self, evaluation and rectification and refinement process that they go through, it's only now in the Midbar that they're able to look back and realize how lowly they had sunken, how lowly and depraved their behavior was. And that caused a real sort of bitterness about themselves, a reflection where they looked back and had a real sort of negative self-estimation about themselves. And this is a fascinating insight, but it is as applicable then as it was today. One of the great opportunities I have as being a communal rabbi for 3 decades is just coming into contact with so many different people. And really, just that has given me such insights into human behavior that I would have never had otherwise. And one thing you see as a rabbi, there are several types of people that you come across. One type of person finds the good in everything, right? There's always something to complain about in shul, right? It's too hot, it's too cold, the seats are too far, the rabbi's speaking too long, etc. There's some type of people that will only see the goodness. They only appreciate all of the goodness. I'm not talking about constructive criticism. I'm talking about those people who just complain about everything. And then you have the second type of people who everything is wrong. Everything is wrong. The AC is too high, the heat is too low, the seats are too far, the rabbi's speaking too long, whatever it may be. I don't like the people who come, whatever it may be. There are people in the exact same environment who only see good, and then there are people who only see the negative, who are constantly complaining. And again, I'm not talking about constructive criticism here or there. I'm talking about the constantly finding problems. And here is a tzad shava, a nakuda mishutefes, a common denominator amongst all those who are constant complainers. And I have found this across the board, is it's not just shul that they complain about. It's every area in their lives. They often have problems in relationships. There's often issues at work. Where does this come from? Why is it that two people can be in the exact same environment and one sees only the good and one sees constant negativity? Yeah, I'm getting actually think my internet connection is unstable. Why would that be? I can't figure it out. So, bottom line is what it often has to do with is one's perception of self. One's perception of self. If you're bitter or you're negative about yourself, then those are the lenses through which you are going to perceive the world. You're going to perceive your relationships. You're going to perceive the people around you. You're going to perceive the environment. Everything is negative, but that negative is coming from within you. Likewise, if a person is positive about themselves, if a person has a positive self-esteem and has a certain love of himself, a certain purpose and a certain mission in life, and appreciates themselves, they will see the world through those lenses as well. It's the real difference between bitter people and happy people. I once saw, I teach, I actually teach a course in Chumash, but I take 5 or 6 weeks off and teach marriage to my seminary students in Brooklyn once a week. And one of the things I study marriage a lot. It's one of my fascinations about, and one of my real goals in life is to try to inspire people to have better marriages. And one of the things I saw was the greatest segula to a happy marriage is to marry a happy person. And it's like so simple, but it's like so true. It seems so simplistic, but there's such emes to that. And I don't mean, when I say happy person, I don't mean necessarily somebody who's a comedian who's joking all the time. Sometimes those jokes actually mask something, that an internal unhappiness. I mean somebody who has a sense of self-worth, who is happy with themselves. Somebody who has a sense of self-worth and happy with themselves and is in general a happy person is much easier to have a happier relationship with, because somebody who's unhappy with themselves and bitter about themselves will have that will clearly affect their relationships as well. So says the Maggid, we see from back in the story of Mara, Ki Morim Haim refers to Klal Yisrael, that they had a negative spiritual self-estimation because now for the first time they're able to realize how lowly they had sunk in Mitzrayim. And he says this is why throughout the Midbar, Klal Yisrael complained. And we can't understand as we're reading the story, why are they constantly complaining? They have the mun given to them from Shemayim. They are experiencing open miracles. They are living literally in the palm of Hashem. And yet, notwithstanding all of that, it is one complaint after the other. Says the Maggid, this is the root of all those Midbar complaints, is their own self-estimation, which is alluded to at Mara. And he says, so if we look at that, we understand that. If we take a look at the story of Yosef HaTzadik, the whole story of Yosef and his brothers began with Yosef speaking negatively about his brothers to their father. Now, when you have a negative estimation of yourself, you are going to see the negative in others. So clearly, the fact that Yosef's brothers were the Shvatim had many positive attributes, the Shvatim. These were tzaddikim. They had many positive attributes, and yet Yosef was only able to see the negative. And that's what he complained to his father about. That gives us some kind of insight into Yosef's sort of growth and maturity here at this point in his life. He has some level of negativity within himself, and therefore he reports that negativity. He sees that negativity in the brothers instead of seeing the positive, and he reports that to the father, and that the entire story unravels from there. That's sort of the beginning of the entire story. What's fascinating is we see that then Yosef's life actually becomes bitter, which, by the way, this is such a powerful lesson, because oftentimes our internal bitterness, which then affects the way that we see the world, actually then manifests itself so that life does become bitter. If I'm constantly complaining about others, and I'm constantly complaining about the world around me and the environment around me and the rabbi and the shul and my wife and my kids and my job, my life does become negative, and Yosef's life unravels and becomes negative. And even after it's all over, and Yosef rises to a level of power in Mitzrayim, but when he names his first son Menashe, he still has that negativity inside him, because Menashe's name is, what is Menashe? He calls his son Menashe because Hashem helped me forget Neshani Elokim, Hashem, help me forget all the pain of my father's house. He's still in that negative mindset, Yosef. But then we see, and this is one of the great beauties of the Torah, beautiful aspects of the Torah, that the Torah shows us the growth of Avram Avinu, the growth of Yaakov Avinu. The Torah shows us the mistakes that our Avos and Imais made and their spiritual growth along the way. And here we see Yosef, when he has a second son, Ephraim, at this point, he has completely changed his mindset. He's no longer steeped in that negativity. And he gives Ephraim a positive name, Ki Ephrani Elokim, even notwithstanding the fact that I'm in Eretz Ani, I'm in the land of my impoverishment and affliction, Hashem has made me fruitful. In other words, you could, in any situation in life, in any person in life, you could see the positive and you could see the negative. And very often, how we see that person or how we see the environment is much more a reflection of how we see ourselves than what the actual truth is. So here, Yosef had the ability to see the positive and the negative. It wasn't until he gave birth to his son Ephraim that he had grown spiritually that he was able to see now completely the positive. And therefore, the Shevet of Menashe, who was influenced by Menashe himself, by his great-grandfather Menashe, that Shevet of Menashe was still influenced by that. Hence, Yosef's name is attached to Menashe. That's why Menashe came back with a negative report. But who was the Nasi of Ephraim? Was Yeshua. Yeshua came back with a positive report because by the time Ephraim was born, Yosef was already in that positive mindset. So Ephraim wasn't affected or influenced by that. And this was the fatal flaw of the Meraglim. Not simply that they underestimated Klal Yisrael, like the first opinion, it was their own bitterness within themselves. It was still that desert bitterness, which then reflected in the way that they saw the land. And that's why the Torah gives us such detail about the grapes. Because again, in any situation, you could see the positive and you could see the negative. The Torah tells us explicitly, they went in the time when the grapes were ripened. That means they were very, very sweet. They were delicious. And you have these big, beautiful grapes. So you can look at them in one of two ways. You can look at them positively. Look at this incredible land. It grows oversized, delicious, sweet fruit. This is clearly an amazing bracha from Hashem. Or you could look at it and you could twist it and look at it negatively. If the fruits are this big, then the giants must be massive. There's no way. You almost have to twist it to look at it negatively. So Hashem was testing the Meraglim and testing Klal Yisrael. Are they done with their internal bitterness? Have they grown like Yosef? Because as the pasuk says in Divrei Yamim, when we say it in our davening every day, Oiz v'chedva bimkaimai. In Hashem's place where Hashem is, there's oiz v'chedva, strength and joy. In Hashem's place, there is joy. Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. To serve Hashem, to come into the land, we have to be filled with joy. We have to be filled with the opposite of internal bitterness. With internal simcha, we have to be filled with. But if we're still filled with internal bitterness, if we're still looking at everything negatively, then we're not zeichet Eretz Yisrael. And so this whole test of the spies was a nisayon, was a test. Therefore, Hashem tells us, I sent them in the time when the grapes were ripened. And they took these huge grapes to show that they had the opportunity to see it positively or to see it negatively. How would they see it? And in fact, they came back and they gave a negative report. They saw it negatively, which was a sign that internally this generation was still bitter from their matzav in Mitzrayim. And therefore, a bitter generation cannot inherit Eretz Yisrael. It can only be a joyous generation, a generation that's filled with simcha. So what a powerful lesson from the story of the Meraglim. Both explanations. Number one, how we have to look at each other, how we have to look at our nation, how we have to look at ourselves, how we have to look at Klal Yisrael. And number two, how our own internal bitterness and negativity affects the way that we see others. And if we want to truly be connected to the land and truly be connected to Hashem, we have to rid ourselves of internal negativity and see when we have an opportunity to see the positive or see the negative, we have to always see the positive in everything. This is the underlying message of the Meraglim. And what a profound message on Shabbos Mevorchim Tammuz. Shabbos Mevorchim Tammuz. Tammuz begins the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks is the Avelis over the beginning of the Avelis over the Beis HaMikdash, which culminates in Tisha B'Av. And we all know that what prevents the Geula from coming? What caused this destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash? It was the Sinas Chinam amongst Klal Yisrael. Number one, how we looked at each other with Sinas Chinam, and number two, where does that Sinas Chinam rooted in? In our own internal bitterness. When we look at others, when we look at Klal Yisrael with Sina, when we have Sinas Chinam, it's much more a manifestation of what's going on inside me than actually the reality of the person that we're not liking. So it's such a powerful message on Shabbos of Orchim Tammuz to, number one, look at Klal Yisrael in positive light. Understand that nothing is beyond our capacities and capabilities. And even if it's going to take a nace, l'mayla mederech hateva, we are capable, Eloi naleh, we are capable of achieving that. And number two, get rid of our own internal bitterness and see the positive and be joyous and see the goodness in Klal Yisrael and in Eretz Yisrael. And when we get rid of our own bitterness and our own negativity and our own self-doubt, it is then that we could see the positive in others. Two powerful lessons to carry into Shabbos Mevorchim Tammuz and to carry into the month of Tammuz, to be mahapich the 3 weeks, to transform the 3 weeks to days of joy and simcha, and the greatest simcha, the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mheira v'yimenu amen. Okay, we're going to say some Tehillim in the schus that Eretz Yisrael should didan notzach, should experience absolute and total victory, l'mayla mederech hateva lagamri, and we should see it take it from miyad mamish. So let's say Tehillim 121 in the schus of our soldiers, in the schus of the idea who are fighting on behalf of the entire civilized world. Okay. Shir lamala isasenai hari miyayin yavoy ezri mi maline ois shemayim biaretz ayitin raglecha yanim shemrecha hinil yanim liyishan shem Yisrael Adonai shemrecha nitzilcha yad yaminecha yem mashemesh leikecha v'yireach b'layla Adonai yishmarcha mikara yishmar es nafshecha Adonai yishmar tzeischa v'yecha mi'ata v'yad eilam. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I'm sorry about the audio freezing. Amir Tzashem will try to figure it out for next week. But if you come in person, I will not freeze. Promise. Guaranteed. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful week.